Hello, everyone. As we're kind of just joining in here, we'll probably start at 3 after. So get settled. We'll wait for a couple people, more people to roll in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, we'll give everyone one more minute, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, everyone. Thank you for taking some time out of your busy day to spend a little bit of time with us and learn about the challenges with third-party cookie deprecation. We have a wonderful set of speakers for you today, and I'm really excited to go through this topic with you all. Today, we're going to be hearing from Zach Van Doren and Cory Underwood. Zach joins us from our partner ActionIQ, and I'm really excited to have you both on today. Zach, do you want to say hello?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Drew. Zach Van Doren. I lead ISV Alliances for ActionIQ, and as part of that role, I do a lot of work around third-party cookie deprecation solutioning, DMP replace solutioning, working with sort of the ad tech ecosystem. Thank you, Drew. Glad to be here.
Wonderful. Thanks, Zach. And from the search discovery team, we have Cory Underwood joining us today. Cory, do you want to say hello?
Hello, and thank you for having me. So I'm an analytics engineer with search discovery, and I tend to specialize in all aspects of data privacy and what that actually means as far as impact to the marketing stack.
Here's what I found.
Wonderful. Thanks, Cory. And we'll let Siri take a break there. Excited to get started with you all today. We hopefully have a packed 30 minutes. We have a couple things that we want to talk through for our agenda today. So Cory's going to start out and tell us a little bit about the problem that we're facing. And then Zach and Cory are both going to talk through some of the approaches that we've seen, and we'll go ahead and have a couple key takeaways, and then we'll open it up for questions. So if you go ahead and just put any of those points in the chat, we'll make sure to circle back to those at the end of the conversation. So without further ado, Cory, do you want to go ahead and get us started on our topic today?
Sure. So next slide, please. So what we're seeing happen in the industry is basically the effect of two very specific things. On one side, since the late 2010s, we've been seeing increasing regulation in the data collection industry. So what that does is through laws such as Europe's General Data Protection Regulation and California's Consumer Privacy Act, we see the need to potentially have consent or allow users to opt out of collection as they view different websites and mobile technology. On the technical side of things, there's two paths that are being taken. One is on the mobile app stores. So both the App Store for Apple and the Google Play Store for Google have different consent requirements that need to be in place for data collection in certain scenarios. Then on the browser side, on the web, we're seeing browsers such as Safari, Edge, and Firefox deploy technology that either heavily impact or outright block data collection. And so all of this results in data loss, both in some cases for the site that you may own, and in some cases for any sort of integration you have with external partners. The net result of that is you see a reduced conversion rate on the advertising platforms because they just can't measure as effectively as they used to be able to do. So as the conversion rate gets adjusted, you tend to start to see fluctuations in your return on ad spend. And so that results in supposedly inefficient budgeting. So you might think an ad isn't doing as well as it technically is. And so you might overspend, or you might think, for example, that you're not getting the reach that you're supposedly that you're desiring. So you might pull back and switch where you're spending the money, but that may not actually be true. That only looks to be true because of the data loss. And so I'll turn it over to Zach to talk a little bit through the marketing side of that.
Yeah, thank you, Cory. You know, and when I often describe this to businesses as a consequence of relevancy and reach, right? And so you mentioned person-based targeting, which is effectively serving ad in relation to a person, to an identity, and being able to target that person insofar as where they are, and then serve relevant content so far as who they are, right? So where are they and who are they, right? So this concept of person-based marketing and the ability to do that at scale is what is massively being disrupted with all these changes, Cory, you mentioned. So as such, we listed, I would say that the three kind of pillars of consequence to the business. One is, of course, cost per acquisition is going up, right? So it's becoming, with this less relevant and constricted reach insofar as getting in front of net new customers and driving incrementality of a customer acquisition, these costs are going up. And then consequently to that, then you have lost revenue, of course. So with conversion rates going down, cost per acquisition going up, you are effectively losing revenue in relation to your ability to drive incrementality of net new customer growth on the acquisition side. I would say a third consequence of this is that I have this listed here as the ad tech spending. So you have a lot of, I would say, bloated ad tech that has been in place for a while, that is built traditionally on top of third-party cookies that are increasingly less relevant, and many of them are very expensive. So DMPs, I mentioned here, are being sunsetted across the ecosystem. Those can be very expensive. And then third-party onboarding can be very expensive. And a lot of those players are moving increasingly towards a kind of retention marketing versus acquisition marketing support. And so what's happening there then is you have the walled gardens are increasingly taking over with regard to being able to, again, affect and deliver person-based advertising at any meaningful scale. So those costs are going up along with this ad tech spend that is built on legacy infrastructure is still out there, and it can be costly.
Next slide, please. So what are some of the options that you can evaluate? You could increase your spend with a walled garden such as Facebook, but then you're confined to the audience within that walled garden. So depending on what the network effect of that particular integration is, you could end up having a lot of reach, but you can't have necessarily reach beyond it. So as depending on the size of the garden, that may be viable, or it may be that you have to do this in conjunction with one of the other things. You could start looking at a stronger reliance on an identity partner, such as LiveRAM. So as the number of devices increases, people will have a mobile phone, a laptop, etc. It's difficult to do both the cross-device analysis as well as it is due to things such as intelligent tracking prevention, which is the technology that Safari uses to mitigate tracking technology, cross-session. So by having an identity partner that can take signals and say, oh, this person that I saw 3 weeks ago is the same person, you could potentially target more relevant ads or deliver a better customer experience. You could also look at adopting technology proposals such as the unified ID, which is based around a hashed email address. But this has the downside of the customer actually has to do some sort of self-identification to leverage this. And so that's a much smaller subset than the anonymous cookies that currently exist in the world today. You could try to ride out the third-party cookie wave as long as it will go. However, we do know that it's increasingly seeing restriction. WebKit, so that's Safari and every browser on iPhone and iPad, they block third-party cookies entirely. We know that Firefox and Edge heavily restrict them. So we're seeing decreased effectiveness here, even though they're still a technology, browsers are starting to phase them out. So as time progresses, you're just going to get less value from continuing to have this as an exclusive method for doing any sort of advertising. You could potentially pursue a shift to contextual advertising. So if you're looking for shoes, you could see advertising for shoes if you're looking at a footwear website. This may have value because you don't have to deal with all of the regulatory requirements around targeted advertising in specific regions, but the ads that you may see on a given site may not be as relevant to you as they could otherwise be. Alternatively, and what we do recommend is ahead of the third-party phase out, you start to heavily invest in a first-party foundation, because that is going to be critical not only from meeting your regulatory requirements that you may be subject to, but it's going to give you the best long-term ability to engage with customers and identify them over time. Anything you want to add, Zach?
Yeah. So again, I would go back to the theme of relevancy and reach, right? And you looking at these options 1 and 2 and 3, it's I think it's what's created here is sort of a inflexibility, a constriction to the brand in being able to operationalize and really affect that combination relevancy and reach. So going in on a walled garden, yeah, absolutely, they need to do that. They will do that, but you're constricted to that specific walled garden. Reliance on identity partner, that creates its own set of inflexibility if you want to leverage other identity standards in the market. Activation on PII, well, you're restricted then to PII signals, and that really doesn't deliver on the need to drive net new incrementality. So if you want to get in front of net new customers, you have to infer that you're not going to have a PII signal in relation to that customer. Third-party cookies, that reach is going away. Contextual, the relevancy of contextual, while it's better than nothing, it's questionable, right? So I think the building a first-party foundation with tooling on top of that, that's a CX Hub is really this is the recommendation we espouse. That's it. Go ahead. So yeah, I'm going to go into approach, and so we're going to talk about approach broken down by a data as foundation. We mentioned first party as that foundation. Then we're going to go into technology which is the tooling, right? So data foundation with tooling and technology on top of that to operationalize that data. Go on to the next slide, please, Drew. Cory, I'm going to have you take the foundation piece, and I'll go into the tooling and technology.
Sure. So we do advise creating a foundation of first-party data. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, you control the data, so you actually know what it is. And that's usually developed through a one-on-one interaction with your customer. So it's going to be of a higher quality. You also have the ability to connect multiple data sources. So that could be your website, that could be your offline stores, et cetera, and that can all feed into the same system and give you a more unified view of the customer across all of your different touch points. But because it's your company dealing with the consumer, those should be of higher quality because you'll be able to understand the complexities that may be applied due to the things that we discussed on the last slide. So for example, if you know that you collect all of your data with first-party cookies, then you don't have to worry about necessarily of the third-party cookie either not being present or being restricted and not as updated as it could otherwise be. Having all of your data in one place is important from a governance point of view because increasingly regulation requires you to have a map of all the data that you collect. And when a customer comes in and is like, hey, I want a copy of all of my data, or I want to delete all of my data, having that in a centralized location that you can verify and pull from is much easier to operationalize than trying to connect dozens of systems to try to get that view. And because a lot of those laws have time limits on how quickly that you need to respond, the quicker that you can make that process, the better off you are because you're going to be able to do it without risking going into violation. Additionally, because you have that first-party data, you may be able to have increased reach or addressability when you can add in those other solutions. So for example, you have the data that you might be able to use with a clean room for a walled garden to target consumers that you know on their platform without necessarily telling them the data that you have. So that creates a privacy safe environment that you don't necessarily have to worry about what they're going to do with data that you may have shared with them because you're not actually sharing them any data that they can actually act upon. This enables you to have a very high degree of control over the data that you have, and you get to be very specific on who you choose to make that accessible to and what they can do that with. And we see this as increasingly the way to go forward because of a lot of those external pressures from regulation and the technology changes. This is probably the best way to navigate those. And I will turn that back over to Zach.
Yeah, thank you, Cory. So I would say that this then begets the other challenge here is that all of this great, vision in terms of proper data foundation requires the application on top of that to do the requisite operationalization, right? So this is the plumbing, which is the integration, the ingest integration, the plumbing for the outbound activation. This is a UI to support the audiencing, the journeying, the activation back into downstream. So all this requires new forms of tooling in the form of application and UI and integrations, connections, whatnot. Go ahead, Drew. We'll go to the next slide. So traditionally, with regard to tooling, and which is basically application layers on top of identity and audiences, you had the DMP, and then you had the CDP, where the traditional application layers, right? And so they performed very similar scenarios and use cases. So which is effectively persisting an identity, enablement to create an audience based on those identities, and then the enablement to push those audiences out into downstream activation channels. So this is mainly paid media and owned media, mainly web personalization owned media. So the DMP traditionally sat on top of pseudonymized third-party cookie-based IDs, right? And you had the usual suspects of Crux, Salesforce, you had Blue Sky, Oracle, you had Adobe. That most of these tools are being sunsetted or being phased out. That because of the fact that the third-party cookie was the basis to which these technologies operated. And then you had the CDP, which traditionally sat on top of PI-based identity and data. So as such, the CDP is operationalizing known identities. So and as a consequence of that, that's operationalizing effectively mid and bottom funnel marketing use case. So this is loyalty, this is servicing, this is email, this is cross-sell, this is upsell, right? This is all the marketing, retention marketing functions that occur when a user has been converted to a lead or to a customer, right? So of course, all this is blowing up in the consequence of the third-party cookie going away and DMP sunsetted. Go ahead, Drew. So when we talk about audience, we talk about application layers and this new paradigm of first-party data foundation. We refer to it as the notion of the CX hub, which is effectively taking the traditional DMP and the traditional CDP and merging them together to have an orchestration layer that sits on top of not just the known PI-based identities, but also going upstream to sit on top of new forms of pseudonymized identities that are replacing the third-party cookie. So this could be, as we mentioned, walled gardens, which are creating and building identity graphs in a first-party context. This is the identity spines, such as Neustar and LiveRamp and Axiom, that are sitting on top of their ID foundations. You have currencies, Cory mentioned the UID 2.0, and there's other forms of currencies out there that are translating PII into privacy safe identities that could be effectively used as a means to activate into paid media downstream. And you have clean rooms that are accessing and building ecosystems of second party, where one brand can connect and in a very safe way share their first party information with another brand to inform measurement or activation across those two entities, right? So it's a enablement to operationalize that full ecosystem of identities across the customer journey to affect audiencing and personalization in relation to acquisition goals and retention goals. And we see this as the primary solution in the market to address both the sort of the disrupted and shifting identity foundation, or data foundation, and then the tooling that would go on top of that. Cory, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but that's my summary.
No, I'm good.
Yeah, okay.
So for some key takeaways from today's session, we want to really stress that as a result of changing regulations, advertisers are really going to need to reevaluate everything they do as far as assembling, analyzing, and activating on customer data, either because you're going to have additional steps that you need to undertake, or that you're going to not be able to necessarily use the data in the same ways that you have been historically. And as we see more privacy law roll out globally, this is going to become an increasing factor for anything that needs to be collected or activated upon. For folks that don't adopt a new strategy ahead of the regulatory and technology changes, they're going to spend quite a bit of time trying to set up a new process while they're trying to figure out what that process looks like. And so there's an increased risk of getting it wrong and spending money in places that were not ideal. So what we're advising here is to be proactive about it and start to define what these processes look like and what you need to do to to get into a good place prior to it being too late and being forced to do that while also trying to figure it out.
Cory, I would quickly add there, we see this, to that point as a crisis and an opportunity for brands who are truly proactive, who get ahead of this shifting disruption in the market. If they're really ahead of it and very proactive and solution in relation and as a consequence to that, they're in a great position to compete in the market against other brands who are not doing that. Go ahead, Cory. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is going to cover basically everything that a website might seek to do from an engagement point of view. So if it's prospecting new users, understanding how you would reach those people if you can't necessarily kick off these processes by default due to regulation. What marketing tactics might you need to adjust for? What does retargeting look like when anonymous IDs are no longer used because third-party cookies have been sunset? Understanding what a replacement technology such as topics might mean for your brand is going to be important. And then understanding any complexity in regard to website personalization and how you would define those segments and seek to operationalize those and deliver that quality customer experience. All of those processes are going to have to be reviewed and potentially changed, but can be supported and potentially enhanced by having a more complete view of the data in something like a CDP. Anything you want to add, Zach?
Yeah, I would say it's data and technology, right? It's data and tooling, like as I mentioned. So it's a twofold problem and a twofold solution, right? So it's the requisite and proper data foundations with the right tooling and the right application layering on top of that is my primary takeaway. And so I think number 3 really speaks to that.
All right. Well, we do have one question in the chat that we're going to get to here in a second, but I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you to Zach and our partner team at ActionIQ. If you'd like to know more about how AIQ is working to solve this issue for clients, please reach out to Zach, our team here at SDI, or you can also download the guide that AIQ has provided surrounding acquisition marketing. We'll go ahead and put that link in the chat, and it will also be sent out with the video recording later today. Thank you guys so much for the time. And Zach or Cory, who'd ever like to answer, we have a question from Olivier. It says, when using first-party cookies only, when does a GDPR banner become mandatory? What would be a good example? My main goal is to not impact UX with a cookie banner if not necessary.
Okay, I want to start off by saying I'm not a lawyer. And you can consult with your legal team. However, it's not GDPR that is the issue necessarily. So in the European Union, they have what's known as the e-privacy directive. That is a banner that has to seek consent whenever you're seeking to read or write non-essential information to the user's computer. Beyond that, if you're collecting personal data, GDPR may apply. But do you need to actually have this banner? That's going to depend on Article 3 in the GDPR. Does the GDPR actually apply to you? And you'd want to work with your legal team to understand that. And then depending on the answer, you may need a consent banner, even if you're only using first-party cookies, because you're doing personal data collection. And that by default under GDPR in the majority of cases requires consent.
And I do believe, Cory, that a GDPR does consider a cookie ID to be personal information, quote unquote.
It does.
It does, yeah. So I don't see any way around Olivier's question personally, but yeah, to your point, we're not lawyers. But
right. So again, if the GDPR applies, then you would probably need the banner. If you're not loading any advertising tech and you're only writing cookies to go through the funnel, then you probably fall underneath one of the exemptions, but you're going to want to talk to your legal team about that.
All right. I think that's all the questions that we had today. So with that, thank you guys so much for the time. If you have any questions, contact information will be in the deck. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.